All right, got back into some coaching and some conversations this past week, and actually it was just really exciting because it's the first time I've been able to get some repetitions in a good little while. So first we'll talk about I was in Oklahoma, had a group of some stud American football players, and I want to talk about the usage of analogies and some of the coaching pieces that we were using. And one of the goals that we were getting after was really maintaining a short foot, heel grounded to the mat in some ankle dorsiflexion or ankle stabilization drills in multi-planes. And one of the issues that we were seeing is that everybody was wearing, probably almost all the guys, there was about 6 or 7 of them, that were wearing shoes that probably wasn't ideal because it's very difficult to see if the heel is staying down inside the shoe. You can probably live with a little bit of rock when you look at a big shoe that maybe even naturally has a rounding towards the heel, but you don't know what's happening inside the shoe. So I felt that was necessary to coach it up. And I usually like to start to bring up some analogies that we can bring to the end of the session. Usually we bring everybody together and just talk about a thing or two. And I got used to that several years ago when I had, that was one of my primary roles at MARSOC, at 2nd Battalion. So those analogies are usually good take-home. Sometimes they're planned. Sometimes, in this case, I didn't know exactly what the analogy was going to be, but when we spent a lot of time in our warm-up, first part of the warm-up with that ankle impression, then I knew we were going to try to come up with something. So here's what it was. I asked the guys to think of if their foot is flat, well then that is the flat part of a triangle, and the flat part of the triangle is the turf. And then the triangle comes underneath the turf, like the bottom part of an iceberg that maybe you don't see, or maybe it's a plant or a crop, so that when you see that what grows out of the ground, but you don't see the potato or the carrot that grows in the ground, and that's what's underground. And just think of it, it's the most biggest potato you've ever seen, and you can't pull it. It is so heavy that no matter what you do to yank that heel off the ground, it won't move. And cool thing, when these analogies work, it's often dramatic. Like you see a significant change, and that's what we saw. It was pretty cool to see that click. What I thought was even better to see was the next morning at the house there was a whiteboard, and one of the guys asked, "Hey, can you explain what you were trying to get us to do?" And I drew it. He's like, makes perfect sense. Now I understand even better that he connected to something visually, while maybe some of the other guys connected to something that was more verbal or more image-based. And the key is that they have to understand. So the one guy who asked to look at it again the next morning, he needed something more, and he didn't create that connection. But once he saw it, now it's really ingrained in his head. And I thought that was really cool that he was that interested, because there was something that he felt differently. And that's a big thing. I think when you're looking to coach, you need somebody to feel the difference. Even if it's the first time, and as long as they're not in this horribly assumed to be injurious position, you really just want them, hey, listen, no. When you try to make your foot into a potato, then I just want you to feel the difference of when you don't think of the potato versus when you do think of the potato. And then we can start to feel the difference between ideal, not ideal, what we want, what we don't want, and then you'll stick with the one you want by eliminating the negative. And I think that's a good way to learn. I think it's the correct way to learn according to dynamic systems. You want to eliminate the negative. You stop making the undesirable outcome. And now the flip side to those using analogies is that they have to understand. I love talking about movies. I love talking about pop culture. And if you don't like the same movies I like, or you never heard of it, or there's an age gap, which is eventually going to happen if it's not happening already, I don't know that high school kids know about Dumb and Dumber. I don't know that high school kids know about the first Jurassic Park and some of the things that are incredibly meaningful, emotional to me. So in order to create that emotional connection, you do have to know a little bit. Now, I also mentioned Oklahoma. Maybe in my mind, people from Oklahoma are supposed to know about carrots that live in the ground, all sorts of farmland that you see when you're flying in. I'm not sure that was something I was thinking of, but ultimately, if somebody grows up in a certain part of the country, there's going to be things that they probably connect with emotionally and mentally, and those are the analogies that I think can really help you coach, and it was really interesting to see that. The other one that we saw in that training session was working on some core work, some stiffness through the spine, and just naturally when things are undercoached or not quite ideal to the standards that I'm looking for, without that long, tall spine, you have that arch, and a lot of times arching still feels like you're having a demand through the abdominals. It feels like you're creating lots of tension. Sometimes you can even lift more weight in a big lift when you arch hard and create that form closure of stabilization through the pelvis and the trunk, rather than force closure where there's a lot of contractile action but no more contractile action. So there's a little bit of a balance there between feed forward and feedback mechanisms. I was throwing a feed forward mechanism, which is not the perfect one. It is not the best one, but it was the way I felt that we should start. And the analogy that I used was tuck your tail. So you say tuck your tail to most people, they're going to go into that posterior tilt, but what they're going to do is use the glutes to do it. Now, I don't know that that's a mistake right away, because I think what I'm trying to get after, when we're doing, in this case, side planks, when you're looking at bird dogs, etc., you're looking for them to feel what that is. You're looking to feel when that pelvis goes there and creating this perception of length through the lumbar spine and pelvis and sacrum, etc. So tucking your tail is a feed forward mechanism, but it allows the position to be appreciated. And then you start to up coach that a little bit with probably some other analogies. So tuck your tail. Now lift your tail up is an anterior tilt. We'll use that because, again, I'm looking to feel the difference. So let's get into that short side plank. Let's tuck your tail. Hey, now lift your tail. Oh, like you feel like you lose a lot of action. You lose a lot of stabilization where you can just push them over. But when they're tucked their tail, they feel like a rock. Give them that kind of situation, that kind of feedback, because they know they're supposed to feel like a rock. But then when they don't, then they'll be able to eliminate that feel. Now, eventually, you want that tail tucked without the glutes, because eventually tucking that tail, you want the glutes to be a driver. The side plank, a plank is a hard style plank. The goal is to kind of use that as a training position for things that are more vertical. But when you're vertical, unless it's stiffness for a press or the top of like a swing or a deadlift, I want those glutes to be firing into hip extension. If the glutes are firing just to maintain a position, then you're not going to have enough juice to use the glutes as prime movers, which is what they really are. So you're going to sell out a little bit with some feed forward strategies for the purpose of getting to a feedback mechanism where things happen very reactively without a whole host of tension. And those were the two things that really got out of that workout. So it was like, when you're looking to train the ankle, make believe there's a big potato under your heel and you can't lift that potato off the ground, and we're really trying to get the heel to stay down. That last piece wouldn't be part of the coaching. I'm going to try to get away from using words like heel and body parts, and then tuck the tail, lift the tail, be able to feel the difference between right and wrong. And when you start to put these things into play, I think it's very useful that the goal is not to be 100% correct all the time or ideal for whatever standards you have for coaching. Maybe you don't care about tucking your tail. You think it's a good idea to arch their back and have open scissors and etc. You might think that. You'd be wrong, but you can think that. Of course, there's going to be times that getting up into your toes is ideal where the heel isn't down, and that's fine too. But ultimately, I think when we're looking to teach or change movement, we need to exaggerate the error and be able to perceive the difference and then throw positive feedback onto the ideal performance and then minimize the negative feedback. But you got to start with some negative feedback, which is not the best way, in my opinion, but it usually is the best way to start. Because they got to know the difference between ideal, not ideal. Got to be able to feel a difference. and now if that negative feedback is lift your tail, shoving him over, then maybe you got something there. So analogies, feeling the difference between ideal and not ideal, fading the negative feedback, honing in on the positive feedback, lots of learning in these situations. And I just used the ankle and the pelvis position in some of our core work as examples to talk about that. And when everybody gets it, now look, these are high-level athletes. Everybody's cool with everybody. No one's concerned about not being perfect in front of their boys. It was interesting, and it was very exciting to see that stuff fall together. All right. Now, additionally, another topic similar is here. Well, I'm in Connecticut right now, but in Westchester County, there was a strongman. Todd Georgie is a significant organizer of some of these strongman events. Got all the equipment in the gym. That's where I train. That's where I can, I use the office there to see folks. So a lot of people, including himself, getting some stuff cleaned up or checked out before this recent competition. And one of the things that we start to see is, and even from my experience of anybody who really does a lot of very, very heavy, intense lifting, you'll start to see these lower back issues, these below the belt issues in the posterior where it doesn't feel like a back problem, but a lot of pain and discomfort along the pelvic rim. And what you might see is, I saw 3 people. I saw a third one today that, again, really got me jazzed to appreciate this, where everybody knows everybody, so privacy issues are kind of implicit, where all 3 of them appeared to have the same symptoms, but all for very, very different things. So when you think of all the heavy pulling, you look at the stones, you look at the overhead pressing in particular. When you got stiff shoulders, you don't want that barbell to be in front of you, so you arch hard to get the bar to be under your base of support, whereas a dumbbell would probably feel very similar, but a kettlebell will feel very, very different. And you're going to see, if you have stiff shoulders, you're going to get back there. Okay, well, you can kind of hide from overhead pressing if you're not a strongman athlete, but now if the shoulders get cranky, but you don't necessarily perceive that as an injury, is because that heavy arch is really compressing some things structurally and causing a perception of discomfort. Now, it can become back pain. You could have some glute minimus things where one of these strongmen had symptoms going down their leg. They were very concerned that this was a disc or something. In my opinion, it was not, because after treating the glute minimus, the pain was minimized, if not abolished. We start to see another one with the same types of symptoms, but very, very stiff everywhere. Shoulders, upper back, hip flexors, everything was on board, so that really there was no choice left but to arch hard in order to create some stability, particularly getting the bar overhead, as well as finishing some big lifts. Arch when you're squatting. But then the third one, he had more mobility than a gymnast. And also very, very strong, 300-pound log press. But ultimately, because he had so much mobility and probably didn't, and was relatively explosive, did not have the stabilization through the scapula and the shoulder, and he used that arch in order to slow down the bar and create that action. So that, all very, very interesting things. But after this third one, it helped him understand why he has very similar symptoms, because the other 2 pushed on him to come see me because they all thought they had the same things, but all 3 of them had completely different reasons as to why their lower back or their pelvis was leading to a lot of symptoms. 2 out of the 3 had stiff shoulders. 1 had mega mobility in the shoulders, but of the 2 that had stiff shoulders, 1 had real tight hips, the other one didn't. So really interesting things where we track down the mobility issues. We're going to follow that up with some 3.5-month progressions in terms of breathing, easy core work. We're not going to get real stiff like we did with that first group we talked about tucking the tail. And then the mobility one, same type of thing, breathing, but we're also going to look at some of our upper body positions. So when you look at strongman, and I say 3.5 months, that's really where a lot of this DNS stuff comes into play, where if you're incredibly powered, incredibly strong, incredibly explosive, you're good at the hard style stuff. You're good at stiffness and planks, bird dogs, curl up, side planks, stir the pot, etc., etc. Those are things that you're inherently good at doing. To kind of put them in a 25-mile-an-hour service road with the same value of keeping spinal stability, that's where we go into some of the DNS. And that's really part of my differential on when do you use this spine neutral strategy versus this other spine neutral strategy. One is very, very intuitive, very feedback mechanisms, and if you don't have good mobility, the DNS pieces are going to feel very, very odd. If you don't have good mobility, most of the stiffness big three pieces, you can still do them and you'll improve whatever pieces to that. But if we just go to those exercises because you think you have back pain and you're not evaluating for mobility, thoracic spine, hips, ankle as well, and one of the three, not significant, but enough ankle mobility that he even said, yeah, it's like every time I pull off the floor, I feel like the bar gets out in front of me. I said, well, yeah, that's you're increasing the lever, and that's why you're loading up the lower portions of your spine. Let's see about improving some of these ankle measures, and then all of a sudden, maybe you'll be able to stay back. For now, let's rack pull, and let's stay off the floor. And then, we're going to see where we get with some of these guys in terms of a training piece, but the message there was eliminate the negative. Stop going overhead, stop going off the floor, and that's hard. That's hard for anybody. That's like telling a runner not to run. But ultimately, that's the way to, in my opinion, that's best to help. Maybe getting on one knee and pressing with a kettlebell, where that kettlebell becomes a little bit of a coach, where the barbell and the dumbbell, you can kind of break your wrist, and the bar lands inside your base of support, and you wind up pressing with about 150 degrees of shoulder elevation, where that is damn sure not going to work, as we know, with a kettlebell. So some things that just got me excited this week, and we're good to have a little change of pace in terms of my workflow. I think I mentioned on a previous previous video, we're going to have our Canada basketball window, so we'll see what we can get out of that. Should be very interesting in terms of how we quarantine, et cetera, but hopefully I'll be able to come up with some things, because I'm sure I'll have a lot of time in the room, maybe to make up some videos and get on top of some other things. So hopefully that makes sense. And if anybody has seen a leprechaun, say yeah.